Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Michael Sandler, your host on Inspire Nation. If you've ever wanted a guiding voice in your life, then do we have the Personal Guidance System show for you. Today I'll be talking with award-winning Australian filmmaker, documentarian, and author Bill Bennett about a powerful new movie, one that's perhaps even more important than The Secret, PGS. Intuition as your personal guidance system. And that's just what I want to talk with him about today, about one man's search for a voice that saved his life and how we can all tap into our own personal guidance system. That plus we'll talk about sadhus and saints, holy men and mystics, research scientists and quantum physicists, the importance of kiss or kill, why you want to open your thalamic gate, and what in the world being a control freak has to do with anything. So, welcome to the show, Bill. Are you ready to shine?
Oh, yes, I am. I'm going to shine as a control freak.
I think you may be in remission, Bill, maybe even more than you realize.
Oh, I think that side of my life now has gone for good, Michael. Absolutely.
Well, I'll welcome you on the show then and celebrate that with a mighty woohoo! So, before we dive right into things, and we've been talking off air, and I've been saying, wait, we want to hold all this stuff so we get it on the show. But I didn't ask beforehand, were you spiritual growing up?
No, only insofar as I was a very keen surfer, and I used to go out surfing, and that link with nature, I think, is a very spiritual link. But when you're 14, 15 years old, you don't really think about it that way. But no, I actually grew up in a secular household.
Yeah.
I did go to a religious school. I think it was my parents' sense of obligation that they should try and give me some kind of religious upbringing, but I never really connected with it. Both my parents were dentists. My siblings have turned into medical professionals. So I grew up very much in an evidence-based household. I then moved into journalism, which only kind of really reinforced that, and in fact brought in an element of skepticism and cynicism. Yeah. So prior to making this film, I could not say that I was spiritual or religious, no.
Would you say you were leading with your head then and not your heart?
I certainly wanted to make the film from an objective point of view, but equally I didn't want to go into it combatively. I didn't want to go into it, if you like, journalistically. I didn't want to be a hostile interrogator. I was prepared to keep an open mind simply because of what happened. Because what happened was so monumental to me, I was curious. And I think really my curiosity led me through the making of the film.
Beautiful. So before we get to what happened to you, first off, how'd you go from journalism to filmmaking? Or was it through documentaries that you got involved?
Look, I actually started off studying medicine because, as I say, both my parents were dentists, and it was kind of required of me to go into one of the medical sciences, just as my siblings have done. But something happened, and when I look back on it now, Michael, I realized that it was my intuition that presented an absolutely critical point in my life. What happened was this. I was going, I think I was in second year med, and I hated biochemistry, and I'd passed all my subjects for the year, but I had what was called a supplementary exam in biochemistry, which I hated, but I did all the study for it and so forth. And I had to sit for this supplementary exam one day in January at 2 o'clock. I had to be in the exam room to sit for that exam, which I knew that I would pass. Then I would pass the year, and then I'd continue on studying to be a doctor. But I was on the Gold Coast on that day, and the surf was unbelievable. And I just picked up a new surfboard. And you know, I'd spent about 5 or 6 years developing and crafting my surfboards each year so that the surfboard would be one with my mind. And I'd got this surfboard and I thought, this is the ultimate surfboard. This is the ultimate surfboard. This is going to do everything that I want to do. But it never did. It never did. I was frustrated as all hell. But I went out surfing this day just before I had to go back to sit for the exam. And on this one day, it was perfect. The waves were perfect. Believe it or not, I was the only person out. There was a light offshore breeze. It was breaking left and right just perfectly. And what happened was that board became part of my mind. If I wanted to be at a perfect place on the wave, that board took me there. Anyway, I looked at my watch, it was 12 o'clock. I had to get out of the water. And I had to get out of the water because I knew that I had needed 1.5 hours to get back to Brisbane in time to sit for this exam. So I took the board, I came in, I took the board, I put it on the car. I remember tying the board onto my roof racks on the car. And then I looked down at the back, on the back dashboard at the back of the car, and there was my biochemistry textbook. And I remember this. I remember looking at the biochemistry textbook. I remember looking at that surfboard, this brand new surfboard that had become one with me, that had become one with the universe. I remember looking at the textbook, the surfboard, the textbook, the surfboard, and then I went, bugger it, I'm going surfing. And and in doing that, I knew that I was making a major life decision that, on one level you could say that was irresponsible and so forth. But now when I look back on it, it was my intuition saying, Bill, this is the wrong thing for you. You should not be doing this. And I went surfing. I blew off the exam. I failed. I didn't pass the year. And then I finally had to decide what I really want to do. And what I really want to do was write. And so that then led me into journalism, which led me into feature filmmaking, which is where I'm now. So I regard that pivotal moment in my life as being my intuition directing me, saying, my personal guidance system saying, Bill, you're going the wrong way, you've really got to do this. Manifested in something as simple as going surfing when I really shouldn't.
Or should have. I got goosebumps. I've got goosebumps, Bill. On this line, I was talking off air how when we look back at our lives, I think we can see the golden thread, that all of these pieces start to line up. And I also read that you did a 1997 road movie, Kiss or Kill, and you are acting intuitively for that as well.
Yeah, look, that was a small movie. It turned out to be probably my most successful movie. And when I look back on my body of work, and probably from your research, you know that I've made a lot of films. I think I've made 16 movies now. When I look back on them, the ones that have worked are the ones that I have made intuitively when they've felt absolutely right. And the ones that haven't worked, either commercially or creatively or critically, the ones that haven't worked are the ones that I've made cynically. I've thought, the audience really would like this kind of film. Kiss or Kill, I had been working on for about 10 years, and I put it aside many, many times because it's basically a road movie serial killer film. But in my country, it won Oscars, our equivalent Oscars for Best Picture, Best Director. It won, I think it was nominated for 12 Oscars.
Wow.
So it was. And it got invited to the New York Film Festival and the Cannes Film Festival and so forth. But what happened was I made that film from the moment I finished the script to the moment I finished the film, finished shooting the film was 4 months to raise the money, to do all of those things. And it was one of these things where, my wife and I were prepared to put our house on the line to get it financed. And, it was just something, it just went boom, boom, boom. And I remember getting to the end of the shoot and shaking my head and looking back and going, what just happened? What just happened? And I got to say, Michael, that's the same thing now that I feel with this film that I've made, Personal Guidance System, on intuition. I'm going to screenings here in Australia, and I look at the film and I am in awe of the forces at work that brought this film to fruition, because I don't claim any ownership of it.
We should talk about how it happened. Before we do that, I want to talk about, you mentioned road movie. I want to talk about one more road that interrupted or was an important part of your journey that helped, I think, position yourself to be ready for this opportunity. And that was walking the Camino in Spain. How did that come about, and how did that change you?
Well, my wife and I had been in Spain with our daughter. She was living in Spain, and we were in a place called Galicia, which is the far northwest of Spain. And we had gone there to keep her company while she was writing a book. And I would go out driving each day, and I'd see these people walking. And they're walking in the rain, and they're walking in the fog, and they had their heads down, and they looked desultory and fatigued and hurting. and I discovered that they were walking this crazy thing called the Camino de Santiago. And I thought, that is a totally meaningless, senseless, stupid thing to do. And I had to do it.
Bingo.
That's right. I simply had to do it. And that I then caught what I now call the Camino virus.
Okay.
And it just took hold. And I came back from Spain with my wife. I said, I'm going to walk that Camino. And she just fell about laughing. She said, there's no way you can do that. And I kept on training and training and training. And there was this, it's just kind of like this thing, this compulsion that builds up. It just builds up and built up until one day I said to my wife, I'm doing it. I'm doing it in 6 weeks' time. I'm just doing it. And Michael, I didn't really know why. It wasn't like a bucket list thing. It wasn't like a physical achievement that I had to do. It made absolutely no sense. And I'm not a Catholic, and I'm not a religious person, so I wasn't doing it for any kind of religious reasons. I just knew that I had to do it. And so I did it. I walked 800 kilometers in 31 days. I had enormous problems with a knee injury, and I tell people that I got through it on painkillers and Coke Zero, probably in equal proportions. And I don't think that it necessarily changed me. What I think is this. I think that it released change that was latent inside me. You see, I decided that I would dedicate the walk to the film that I was yet to make. I dedicated it to PGS. And I started off a blog called PGS The Way. I had this, in the same way that this compulsion was building to walk the Camino, the compulsion to make the film was building as well. But it would be another year before I made the film. But I decided that I would walk the Camino intuitively, which was terrifying to me because I'm a filmmaker, I'm a film producer, and I love organization. I love research. I love knowing exactly where I'm going to be at a certain time, and I want to make sure that I'm staying in the best place and it's got the best reviews and all that sort of thing. I just threw all of that out the window, and I just decided that I would wing it. That I would just walk the Camino intuitively and allow each day to unfold as it should. And I had a far richer experience because of that. And it really did lay the groundwork, lay the foundation for me later making the film.
There's a term that I call that you experienced on the road. There's no way you can avoid it, and I believe it's how you may have done some of your filming, at least for this movie. I call it road magic. It's the synchronicities, the people that you bump into in the road, that there is zero odds of this taking place, and yet it just happened time and time again, and it steers you to just the right place at just the right time.
I mean, that's why I love road movies so much, and you're absolutely right. There is a section of the Camino called the Meseta. It's about a 200-kilometer stretch of essentially straight, flat plain. And it's incredibly confronting to some people. I mean, some people absolutely freak out on the Meseta, or they avoid it altogether. I loved it, and I believe that as a pilgrim, you are defined by how you react to the Meseta. What you've got with the Meseta, and this goes back to what you were saying, Michael, is this. You've got this long, straight stretch. It goes endless, endless, endless. And you get into this metronomic, hypnotic kind of zone where you're listening to your feet on the path. You're listening to your walking poles go clack, clack, clack. There might be the wind. I never listened to any music or any headphones or anything like that. I was always open to the sound of the elements around me. And what happens is that you disconnect from your rational brain. You go into this kind of meditative, metronomic kind of state, and that allows these intuitive signals, these intuitive impulses to come in. And I found it quite extraordinary. But getting back to my theory, I've got a theory on most things. You see, I was amazed. I looked around me and I saw people 80, 85 years old walking 800 kilometers. I saw people with cancer walking 800 kilometers. I saw all of these extraordinary miracles happening around me each day, and I began to wonder why. And what what I believe is this. This is a pilgrimage path that has been active for over 1,000 years. And I believe that the path has this spiritual imprint, this energetic imprint that is left by the spiritual intention of every footfall of every pilgrim that has walked before. And we're talking about tens of millions of pilgrims that have walked that path over the years. And I believe this spiritual imprint is there in the path, and it seeps up. It seeps up into the energetic system of pilgrims that come later, if they allow it. And that's the big caveat, if they allow it, because there are some people who walk the Camino and they just simply don't allow it. They see it as an athletic exercise, or they see it as a party trip or something like that. And they don't allow this. They've got barriers in their feet chakras, that stop this energy coming up. But those that do allow it and are willing to accept it, I think they can have a most extraordinary transformative experience walking the Camino. And interestingly, I didn't realize this, but I learned it later. The author who wrote The Alchemist, Paul Coelho, is that how you pronounce his name?
Yep. As best as I can pronounce it.
I always get his pronunciation wrong. But he walked the Camino before he wrote The Alchemist. And he attributes a lot of the insight that he had into The Alchemist by having walked the Camino.
There's an important word. When you said people allow it, the word that comes to mind is presence. You shut off the radio. I did a 5,000-mile journey myself on bicycle many years ago, and you shut off the radio. You go quiet. You be with the experience. Like you said, you're rhythmically with your footfalls, and I think that allows the magic to take place.
Yeah, I really believe so. One of the things about intuition, which we might get to later, is the fact that you have to be willing. You have to be willing to accept intuition. And a lot of people aren't. And I think that willingness is a terribly, terribly important function in the process of accessing your intuition.
So let's go from there, and then let's talk about what was the seed. It was a very big seed that was the impetus for making this movie, or going on this journey to meet all of these masters and figure out what's going on. What happened when you were driving in the States one day?
Look, I was working on a movie. It was a thriller. I was shooting in New Orleans, and it was very early in the piece. I was there by myself doing early location work, and I was driving to the airport, the New Orleans airport. I had to get the first flight back to Los Angeles. It was early in the morning. It was before dawn, and as I approached an intersection, I had a green light up ahead. In fact, I'd slept in and I was running late. I was sort of eager to get the car into the rental place and so forth. But as I approached this intersection, I heard a voice, and the voice said, "Slow down." I never heard a voice like this before, ever. And my inclination was to speed up so that I got through on the green, so that I didn't get held up on the red light. And I went to accelerate, and the voice said again, "Slow down." It said slow down twice. And I did slow down. And then as soon as I entered the intersection, out of nowhere, a huge truck ran a red light on my right-hand side, coming through a cross street. It hurtled through the intersection. I then jammed on my brakes, and it just narrowly missed me. And then I pulled up on the other side of the intersection. I was shaking, and the adrenaline kicked in and so forth. But had I not listened to that voice, had I not slowed down before entering that intersection, that truck would have smashed straight into me and I would have been killed. I have no doubt about that whatsoever. It triggered three questions in me. What was that voice? Where did it come from? And why was my life saved? And I couldn't get those three questions out of my head. And those three questions propelled me then 18 years. From that time when that happened to now is 18 years. That for 18 years, those three questions propelled me through this whole process.
Phenomenal. And it is, when you look back on it, I have to think one of the reasons that you were, quote, spared is because that was the Keystone event that had to take place, the one domino that had to fall for all of these other events to later take place.
Yeah. When I think, I didn't realize that at the time, but now when I look back on it, you're absolutely right. And I have to ask, why was my life saved? And one of the questions, as you know, in the film I ask is, well, why me? I'm not special, you know. It's not like I've lived a saintly life and deserve to be saved. So why is my life saved? That was a question that dogged me for a long time.
You talk about it from many areas, but there was one you didn't cover. You go about karma and all these different possibilities, but you only allude to it, and I have to believe it's a big part of it, which is your life was, quote, saved, because then you would go on this journey and share your story with countless others, and it would have such meaning and, well, forgive the pun, impact.
Yeah. Well, you know, look, it's really interesting, Michael. When I got word that I was going to be on your show, I immediately went into this fit of absolute abject terror.
Oh no! I am so sorry, Bill.
Because you see, you have these amazing people on your show, and they're incredibly knowledgeable and articulate, and they're experts. And you see, I'm not an expert. I'm just a regular bloke who had this thing happen, and I had curiosity, and I've got the technical skills to be able to put that curiosity into a form, you know, that now presents itself as a film that I can show to people. But you see, I'm still, I will never channel. I mean, I still have trouble meditating. You know, I meditate each day now, but it's a struggle each day to keep my mind still. You know, people talk about monkey minds. My mind is like a rampaging gorilla that's been tasered. That's what my mind is like. You know, but each day I do my best, which is, you know, what I believe you're required to do. But yeah, you're absolutely right. My job is to be what I am, and that is a regular person. This thing happened to them, and now I'm able to go out and tell people what happened and how it changed my life. And the thing about it is this, is that in showing the film to people as I have in Australia, one thing which happens time and time again is that everybody wants to come up and they want to tell me about their intuitive experience, about, you know, the voice that saved their life, or, you know, some kind of intervention that helped them either from death or injury. So what happened to me is not unusual. You know, it's not special at all. It happens all the time. And that's one of the astonishing things that I found in the making of this film.
So let's talk about that, and let's talk about one of my all-time favorite guests. And I'm curious what the intuitive path was that led you to him, and that's Paul Selleck.
Well, okay. So to answer that question, I need to probably go back one step, and that is I tried to make this film initially the way I've made every other film. And I've been quite successful at making films over a long period of time. And the way that I made films in the past has been through, let me put it kindly, type A personality traits.
Dot your I's, cross your T's.
Well, exactly. And don't let any obstacles stand in your way, you know, and push through no matter what the cost.
Oh, well, here comes the 2x4.
Exactly. I tried that with this film, and it just didn't work, and I was getting nowhere, and it just wasn't happening, and I was getting more and more dispirited. My intuition, my instinct, my commercial brain, if you like, told me that this would be a film that people would want to see and that it was worth persevering with, but it just wasn't happening the way that I'd done previous films. I realized quite late in the piece that I had to make this film intuitively. But for me to make the film intuitively, it wasn't about reading books or going to workshops or anything like that. I had to actually change. I had to actually become intuitive myself. And one of the reasons the film has taken so damn long is because that was a long process for me, you know, to actually take on board what it means to be an intuitive, spiritual person. That, you know, coming, as we talked about before, from my background, that was a huge shift for me. So what happened was this. I never set out with a list of, you know, like the top 25 experts in intuition. I was going to go approach them and tick them off one by one by one. That never happened. I was led from person to person to person. Everybody who appears in the film was somebody that I was led to. I mean, I didn't know who Norm Shealy was, with respect to Mr. James Van Praagh. I didn't know who James Van Praagh was.
Yeah.
I didn't know who most of these people were. Lee Carroll, Judith Orloff, Carolyn Mace, of course. All of these extraordinary people. Now that I realize, like, they're big deals. But I didn't know that at the time. I was just led to them. And I went, yep, this feels right. I'm going to do an interview with Carolyn and, and so forth. But with Paul Selleck, what happened was this. I had got to the point where I thought, okay, I've got to put a pin in this. I've got to stop filming. It's all finished. Now I've got to start editing. And then one day I was on the internet and I was fooling around. I was looking at books. And up came this book, I Am the Word, which is Paul's first book that is channeled by his guides. And I don't know what it is, Michael. I mean, you look at all these various books on Amazon and so forth all the time. This book just kind of jumped out of the screen, grabbed me by the throat, kind of choked me and said, Bill, you have to read this book. You have to read this book. I read this book and then I started... as I say, I go on these long walks and I listen to them on an audiobook as well. And Paul does the narration. He does the narrations just like the spirit guides are talking. And I just knew then absolutely I had to go to New York specifically to interview Paul Selleck so that he could be in the film. And I would say that Paul has been one of the really major influences on me personally and on the film. In allowing me to make the film in the manner that I have. And the wonderful thing is he's become a friend as well, which is fantastic.
He is such a special human being. So after you filmed him, did it change how you, because I imagine you do all the filming first, you may have a storyline, although since you were doing this one intuitively, you may have done some major following of the breadcrumbs, rather than, in a sense, storyboarding it out. After meeting with him, did it kind of shuffle your order or how you were getting the messages out to people?
Well, look, I'm an experienced filmmaker, and I've done a lot of movies, and I really know how to put a film together. This movie cold cocked me. It like whacked me on the back of the head. And I didn't know what I was doing or how I was going to do it, Michael. I mean, I came back with 76 interviews and over 120 hours of footage, and I didn't know where to start or what I was going to do. And so what I did is I started to break the interviews down into little bits, segments and so forth, and then myself and the editor used metadata then to kind of log them and so forth. It took 2 years to edit this film, which, as you know, is a long, long time. And I mean 2 years solid, each day going into the editing room. But here's the thing, I would walk to the editing room each day from where I was staying in Sydney at the time. It was an hour and 20-minute walk. And each day I would listen to a Cryon podcast. And I would choose the podcast intuitively. So, I'd go onto his website and I'd kind of like close my eyes and just sort of like, just choose one at random. Invariably, the channeling that I chose from Lee Carroll from Cryon was exactly what I needed to hear for the problems that I was going to face in the editing room that day. It happened time and time again. And it just emphasized this fact that this damn film was just being made by forces outside of me. And that my job, I remember sitting down with the editor saying, I'm the tiller man. That's all I am. I'm the tiller man. And this boat is going downstream. It's going downstream. And my job is just to keep it off the rocks, and to deliver the cargo at the estuary, at the end of the journey. And that's my job. I'm nothing more than that.
When you realize that, are you in a place of awe, a place of grace, or a place of, dear Lord, let me do a good job with this?
I was in a place of humility, and awe really is a part of that as well. But, okay, let's talk about ego for a second and personality, because I know that I know that there is a spiritual train of thought that sees ego as being, this dirty word. I actually believe that ego and intuition can coexist. You see, I have subsumed myself to the processes, to the guidance that has come through for me to make this film. I look at how this film's come together, and I'm gobsmacked. I take no sense of ownership. But equally, I have placed my own personality on it, my own ego, if you like. And I'm not talking now about ego in the sense of this domineering, Paul talks about small self, small self kind of way. I'm talking about that aspect of me that is particular to me, that allows me to take my own shape and form, the service, if you like, that Paul Selleck talks about, service. I bring my personality to the service in that particular way, and so that's why the film is the way it is. But Michael, I was never meant to be in this movie. Now, you've seen the film, and for people who haven't seen the film, let me just say this. What you got is you've got an 83-minute movie, and there are various, what I call chapters, and various chapters look at various aspects of intuition, how to use your intuition, how to tap into it, and so forth. And I bookend these chapters with little small 2-3 minute little pieces where I kind of, wander around this existential desert landscape. I was never meant to be in the movie. I didn't feel as though I had a right to be in the film. I'm not an expert. I didn't feel like I deserved to be in the film. But right at the very end, I got feedback from people to say, Bill, you've got to be in this movie. You've got to take ownership of it. You can't be a coward. You've got to step forward. And so I put myself in. But that was only right at the very end.
I'm having a strange moment of deja vu, as if a guest has told me this before, but I don't think a guest has told me this before. So I think what you're saying is incredibly powerful, and for myself watching it, that was the golden thread. You were the required element that brought the human factor to it, that made it relatable to everyone. That what is this personal guidance system? Why is it important? What does it mean to me? How do I use this thing? If you hadn't been stumbling through the dark on your journey, then I don't think we would have had that anchor to latch onto through the movie.
Well, thank you for saying that, and that's the conclusion that I came to, and that's the reason that I finally put myself in there, not because I wanted to have my mug on screen, which ain't that pretty, but I felt that I needed to be the entry point. And here's another thing too: the entry point for males, for men, because a lot of the content in the film and a lot of intuition is about women. It's very feminine. I wanted to have a feminine package with a masculine wrapping, if you like, so that men could identify with me and what I'm going through. And hopefully it allows men to look at intuition in a more accepting, more trusting kind of way. I think it's terribly important that men take on, acknowledge and trust their intuitive side, because so often, because they believe it's their job to keep the species alive, they have shut intuition out of their lives. And really what I'm hoping is this film will go some way, a small way, to saying to men, hey, it's okay to be intuitive. In fact, you can operate more productively, more efficiently, and to greater benefit to you and to other people if you do act intuitively.
Yeah, and speaking about my coaching, which is almost all helping people drop to head to heart, I believe particularly now more than ever, it's needed. It's not optional. It's not, well, I am all science-based, and you have some amazing scientists on the show. I'm science-based. I have to stay rational mind. The rational mind Well, I used to say it could keep you from getting hit by a truck. But in this case, the rational mind didn't serve that purpose. It's intuition that is going to make everything work. And I think intuition, that is literally, if we want to talk about survival of the species, it's time to go that way if we're going to survive at all.
Well, look, absolutely. There are... I was very confused starting out as to what intuition actually is, because it seems such a big catch-all phrase, and people use the term almost indiscriminately without really understanding what it was. And I looked for a definition of intuition. I could never really find a definition that pertained to what happened to me. And I actually came up with my own definition, and that is
awesome.
Intuition is a sudden, unexplained insight that comes unaided by logic, intellect, or expertise. Now, a lot of people will say, well, that's not the intuition that I know. You know, like the intuition that, say, a CEO uses to make a complex decision. What I determined, Michael, it took me a long time to realize this. I've come up with these three categories of intuition. There's what I call survival intuition, which is like a mother's intuition for the child, or that fight or flight intuition that we feel when we have a sense that danger is nearby. It's survival of the species. So that's survival intuition. Then there's what I call cognitive intuition. And cognitive intuition is based on past experience or expert knowledge. So that is the intuition that a CEO uses, you know, when they have to make a quick, fast, complex decision. It's the intuition that a scientist might use when they have an intuitive spark that leads to a scientific breakthrough. But it's based on expert knowledge. And then there's what happened to me in a car, and is what this definition is about, is what I call mystical intuition. And mystical intuition is intuition that has no basis in intellect or past experience or expertise or anything like that. It's a voice, you know, it's dreams, it's coincidence and synchronicity, it's precognitive flashes. It's these things that aren't rooted in any kind of logical, rational thought. That's mystical intuition. And that's the intuition that really interests me, and that's the intuition that this film is based on.
Thank you. And fascinating. I love, you are now an expert on intuition. You do realize that now.
I don't think so. But I've had to kind of figure this stuff out myself because, you know, reading all these books as I have, there seems to be gaps in it. And I've just kind of stumbled along and kind of put stuff together myself, Michael.
So you have met literally with mystics around the planet. When we're talking about mystical intuition, what are a few of the key takeaways that you've gotten from them that have helped you either frame or understand intuition in your own mind?
Well, I think the overwhelming thing that comes through is that intuition is a system. It is what I call a personal guidance system, but I've come to believe that it is as legitimate a functioning system in our bodies as any other system, like our circulatory system, our immune system, our digestive system, and so forth. It's just that intuition, and I'm now talking about mystical intuition, operates within the energetic realm. And it interfaces, how it works is that energetic realm interfaces with our physiological processes, our biology. And when it comes down to it, and I've tried to kind of, you know, study intuition and bring it right back down to Tues, intuition is a messaging system. That's what it is. I call an intuitive hit God's, what do they call them? God's DMs. God's direct messages. You know, because we can look at intuition from all these kind of complex, esoteric ways. But I think my job is to try and make all of this, kind of filter all of that and try and make this very accessible. And when it comes down to it, intuition tries to send us signals so that we can make the right choices in life. And that's what it comes down to, because our life is based on the choices we make. Now, what I've come to believe is that we we come onto this earthly plane in this incarnation with a blueprint, with a destiny path. And what our intuition tries to do is tries to keep us on that path. And that's what happened to me with that surfboard. I was off my path. I was going down a path that my parents wanted me to go down to be a doctor because they were dentists. But that wasn't my path. And my intuition kicked in at that moment, and it showed me if that textbook, Michael, hadn't been on that, that back ledge of.
If you hadn't had the perfect day of surfing, you were gifted with a perfect day.
Exactly. If it had been a crappy day with onshore wind and no waves, I would have been at that exam because there was nothing else to do.
Mm-hmm.
But how often? I mean, we're talking about the Gold Coast in January, right? Even back then, there was like nobody out, and perfect waves breaking left and right. I mean, so mystical intuition at that point kicked in,
mm-hmm.
and when it comes down to it, that's how I think intuition works. It is a legitimate system, and the reason that science doesn't validate it is because, as Dean Radin says, Dean Radin's in my movie from the Institute of Noetic Sciences, Dean Radin says, we don't have the instruments to measure it yet.
Mm-hmm.
And without instruments, science can't empirically validate it. And so when they can't empirically validate something, they say, oh, it doesn't exist. But we know it exists because we feel it. I know it exists because I heard it and saved my life.
Absolutely. So let's talk briefly about some ways that we can tap into our intuition that you learned from all these incredible people that you met in the movie or met in making the movie. First off, stop.
Yeah. We live such busy lives. We don't allow, this comes back to this word that we used before, we don't allow our intuition to actually present itself. It's trying constantly to give us messages. But because we're bouncing around from our cell phone to our laptops to social messaging, to social media and all of this, we find it really hard. I tell you where our intuition does get a chance to kind of put its foot in the door, and that's in the shower. Because,
yes.
Oftentimes most of us don't have waterproof cell phones, so we don't have our cell phone in the shower. And that is a moment where we've just come out of our sleep state. Our soul probably, is still kind of transitioning back into our bodies. And we've got this warm water, hitting us and so forth. And that is a time when intuition does present to a lot of people. So that's when we stop, yeah.
I like to take baths whenever I can before an interview. I'm going, I don't really have, quote, time. I've got these questions to come up with. I've got this, I've got that. Either I'm going to throw myself outside, if I've got the time for that, or I'm going to take a short bath because it's going to force myself to step as far away from the, quote, problem as I can. And that gives that internal guidance system, that personal guidance system, a chance to flip on and for me to hear it.
Yeah, exactly. This whole thing about we don't have time, it's a nonsense. Of course we have time. And what you experience, in fact, is a very productive use of your time. I agree. Look, basically I go through 5 steps in the film. Stop, listen, ask, trust, and follow. Listening is, once you stop, you've got to listen.
Mm-hmm.
There are times when you do have to ask for guidance. There's absolutely no doubt about that. Trust is a big one.
Let me pause you on ask. We'll go through these each just a little bit. So,
okay.
Actually, let's back up to listen, if you don't mind. Real quickly, how do we know if the guiding voice is our intuition?
Paul Selleck says, our mind, what's he say? Our mind thinks and our intuition knows. And one of the people in the film, a Swami, in fact, that I met again by intuitive chance on the banks of the Ganges, says that how you can delineate between, if you like, your personality thought or your intuitive thought is there is absolute surety with your intuition. There's no doubt, and there's no bad feeling associated with intuition. if it is your ego, your rational mind coming up with a thought, then there's always this constant doubt. But with intuition, there's an absolute sense of surety, and there's a calm sense of knowing that this is the right thing.
My wife is taking a trip out to Colorado, I guess beginning of March. We're going to be moving out to Colorado, moving back to Colorado in April, someplace we started our journey together 9 or so years ago. It'll probably be 10 years when we get back out there. And my head is going, where are we going to move? How's this going to look? What are we going to do with the show? Blah, 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 blah. She goes from downstairs, she comes upstairs, and she tells me, I'm here in my studio. She goes, I got this amazing deal on tickets to Aspen. And my heart soared.
Yeah.
It just went, woohoo! Rational mind completely out the window, gone, not thinking about the prices, the logistics, the anything. And she went back downstairs, and I said, bookmark this moment. We don't know if it's Aspen or not, who knows, but that was an intuitive hit that something felt just right.
Yeah, that really is the key to it. One of the really neat little things that I picked up in the making of this film is this: first thought, best thought.
Absolutely.
Your first thought's your intuitive thought, and that's the really crazy left field thought that could lead you to all sorts of trouble. But that's your intuitive thought, and that's your guidance thought, and that's the thought that has the bigger picture in mind. But what happens is that we default to our second thought, which is our rational thought, which is our safe thought, which keeps us in past experience and limits us and contracts us. And if we go with our first thought, I mean, this comes to trust. It takes a huge amount of courage often and trust to run with that first thought, best thought, because it's the thought that breaks the rules. It's the thought that goes against common sense or good judgment or all those things. But you know that it's right. You know that it's perfect for you at that time. But it takes courage to do that. And you've got to trust.
It so goes right back to Aspen, because I can go and look on Zillow and look at how much real estate is, look at how much rent is, and my thinking mind can tell you why this is absolutely, positively not where we're supposed to be. But that intuitive hit tells us otherwise. Let's talk about another one of these concepts that goes right in with that. You said ask, and what's the importance of detaching from the answer?
Yeah, there are a couple of aspects to ask. One is this thing that Dr. Norm Shigley says: you have to detach from the answer. So you can't, and you can't force it. But the other aspect of asking is this, and that is what James Van Praagh talks about in the film, and that is divine timing. I think divine timing is a terribly important part of this asking, because when we ask, we want things tomorrow. We want the answers straight away, or we want it to be really clear cut what the thing is. But divine timing, you've got to really trust in that. And the way I figure it is this, right? So you've got this all-knowing, all-powerful, all-loving, all-benign creative source. And this creative source got a bloody big job to do. It's got to coordinate all of these people and all these things. And, it's like this gigantic chessboard, the creative source has got. And, there've got to be a few pawns that have got to move in a couple of places. And they've got to, rooks have got to move here and there. And castles have got to move here and here, for your plan to come into fruition. So you've got to trust that divine plan, that divine timing is working out. It's not necessarily to your timing, but there is a divine timing in place, and things will work out. And this was a really hard one for me, Michael, in if you like, my development, my spiritual growth, and that is to let go of impatience. Part of what I did always was based on impatience. I've got to have this now, and tomorrow is too late, and all of this. One of the things that I've learned in the making of this film is to just trust in divine timing.
How did you learn to trust in divine timing? And ultimately, it even comes back to trusting yourself to trust in divine timing. It's going to be all right. I just have to let this go right now. It's going to be fine.
Yeah, I think letting go is the really important words spoken there. I say we come back to control freak. I was a control freak. You don't become a writer, producer, director, because you trust other people. In the creative process, I find it very, very hard to let go. But with the making of this film, I've realized that, in fact, I can get better outcomes if I let go, if I do trust, and if I let go of this need for things to happen in the time frame in which I want them to happen. The other thing that has happened in all of this is that I don't feel disappointment anymore. It's a very, very strange thing, but people and circumstances no longer disappoint me. If things don't work out, I'm not disappointed, or I'm not shattered, or I don't gnash my teeth and go, you rah, 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 rah. I am not disappointed. I go, okay, well, that's divine guidance. That's divine timing.
You got to take the trust on both sides.
Well, exactly. And so if you can get to a point where you're not disappointed in anybody, or you're not disappointed in yourself, probably more importantly, it's a wonderful place to be. It really is.
Woohoo!
I've got to do one of those woohoos before we finish this show, Mike.
All right. I'm going to give you multiple opportunities as we start to wind things down. Well, one important concept that comes with trust, that comes with letting go, that comes with this part of the process is your self-worth and being okay with yourself.
Yeah, look, I think coming back to what you said about what was the one thing that I learned, in all the people that I met, one of the things that comes through very, very strongly, in which Lee Carroll, who channels for Cryon, talks about a lot, and that is the notion of self-worth. You cannot be open to intuitive DMs, direct messages, if you're angry, if you're combative, if you are always... if you're not at peace with yourself and with the people around you and with the world. And getting to that point of acceptance of, as Paul Selleck says, who you really are, who you truly are, which is an aspect of the divine. Once you get to that point, then intuition starts to flow. But, that's a hard journey for a lot of people.
Absolutely.
It's been a hard journey for me. Yeah.
How have you done that? How have you been working on that?
Through seeing how it works. Really, when it comes down to it, it really is as simple as that. I've tried it the other way and it hasn't worked. And then I've tried it this way and it has worked. And Lee Carroll talks about the proof of experience. Now, okay, so this is really freaky. And there might be some people who are listening to this who might think this is, a bit odd. But, we're in the holiday period at the moment. And I have no qualms at all about going to the busiest shopping centre at the busiest time of the day and getting the most perfect park. Right?
I love it.
And it happens. Now, you might say, okay, well, that happened once, Bill, but it's never going to happen again. But no, it happens time and time again. And all I have to do is I have to come back to this word ask. All I have to do is ask for the perfect place and the perfect, and the car park might be full and all those little red lights on the top of the little parking spots, they're all full. And then I go down one of these alleyways that, these things where all of these cars have got all these red lights. And then suddenly, right opposite the entrance to the shop where I need to go, this car pulls out right in front of me. And I've got the perfect park. And this happens time and time again. So I've got to ask why. Why is this happening? And one thing, somebody that I spoke to said, well, you're in energetic alignment. And, well, I'd like to think that I am, but I don't necessarily think that's true. But the other thing, too, is this, and that is that I do believe that Spirit sends you messages of validation, and this comes back to proof of experience. Things happen. And if you pay attention, and this is another word, key word, that I came up with time and time again. If you pay attention to these little signals, these little moments of validation, and you start to go, oh, okay, well, look, that could have been a coincidence, but maybe it was my guidance system saying, I can do this for you. I can get you the perfect spot. on Christmas Eve in the biggest shopping center, in town.
A great exercise that I have people do if we're working on cultivating this in them is to have them start a synchronicity journal and to write down these experiences that seem like once in a blue moon, but when they start putting them down, first off, they seem to happen more because we're more aware and we're more open, and then it becomes this huge body of evidence that suggests very clearly there's something more going on.
Exactly. And this comes down to a system, a guidance system, and which I absolutely firmly believe in, which I live my life by now, absolutely. Spirit, intuition, guidance tries to connect with us in a whole bunch of ways. And what I've come to realize is that it's persistent. And not only is it persistent, it's also creative. So if it doesn't get you one way, it's going to get you another way. If it's it could be words on the side of a bus as it goes past. It could be lines in a song when you turn on the radio. It will try various ways to get your attention, to guide you. And as I say, intuition comes down to choices. It's guiding you towards making a particular choice to keep you on your destiny path.
I think there's an important word here, because what I was thinking as you were saying that is it tries all these different ways. In the mantra that I use is kind, gentle, easy, good, and then it starts to turn up the volume and turn up the volume and more and more and more until it grabs the 2x4. But if we would pause so that we can listen and hear, we typically, not always, but typically will hear things more easily.
Well, you're right, and you talk about the 2x4. Let's call it a spiritual 2x4.
Yes.
Sometimes that manifests in a serious illness. Sometimes it manifests as a financial calamity, or a partner just packing up and walking out, or things that you think of as being absolutely calamitous at that point in your life. One of the really important things that comes through the film for me, and I've thought about this time and time again, Michael. Carolyn Mace, towards the end of the film, she says, how do you know something is a bad thing? How do you know it's a bad thing? And I've thought about that, and I've thought, bloody hell, there's such wisdom in that. How do you know that financial, that you've lost all your money? How do you know that that's a bad thing? It might open up a whole other avenue of life that, in fact, is what you were meant to do. So yeah, that's a spiritual 2x4. That really, really bad thing, because you haven't listened to the guidance probably that was there before, because you weren't aware, you weren't paying attention to it.
I was racing bicycles in Europe a long time ago, trying to make it to the Tour de France. Went through a blind turn, waved by safety officials, right into an oncoming car. Elderly woman had gotten her car, full-size Peugeot, down an alley, and I didn't even realize she's driving down a raceway. And in that moment, I'm laying on the ground. It's grisly. And when I looked and saw the damage, I thought to myself, God is dead. There is no God. And it was 7 or 8 years of PTSD after that. The long and short of it was, thank God for that event. And that brings us, it was a cornerstone or a keystone in everything that took place in my life since then. It was so important. I wouldn't say beautiful because it hurt like hell. But when we talk about bringing this full circle in this beginning of the interview, we're talking about following the golden thread that we can only see when we look back at our lives. Like what Carolyn Mace is saying, when we look back at our lives with enough distance, with enough perspective, we can see that the majority of these things, and if you don't see them as gifts now, they may appear that way later. Not talking about personal tragedy and death, but these guiding events in our lives are special. They're really special.
Yeah. And so what you think is a bad thing at the time, you have to later on in life, you have to be thankful for that. Because that has brought you to the place that you're at right now. And that's why I say I've gotten rid of disappointment. Because things that I used to harbor as regrets as major disappointments in my life, I now look back on it and I go, thank God that happened, because if it had not happened, I would not be here right now talking to Michael Sandler.
Doesn't that make, and that's a mighty woohoo!
Woohoo!
All right.
Yeah.
Doesn't
that was 4 stars and yours is still 5 stars.
We'll get 1 or 2 more in. We're running over, but I'm having too much fun.
Okay.
Doesn't that free you up? Doesn't that make you lighter? Doesn't that help keep you from wasting your energy where it doesn't belong on judging things that you have no idea how that's going to turn out anyway?
Oh, crikey, are you right? Are you right? I mean, suddenly life becomes so easy. It really does. It becomes so easy because this might sound really weird, but I'm not afraid of anything now. I'm not afraid of anything. And I tell you what, this goes back to the Camino.
Yeah.
I got to this point in the Camino. I was walking doing this thing intuitively, and I started to realize, I had a bad knee, and I didn't know where I was going to sleep that night, and and all of these things. And I came up with this mantra: what's the worst that can happen? And I started to kind of break down. What's the worst that can happen? Well, I'm not going to get a bed tonight. Okay, well, I can sleep in a paddock. And then you start to apply it to other aspects of your life. What's the worst that can happen? You're going to lose all your money. Well, that's okay. I can survive without money. What's the worst that can happen? Your wife's going to die. Well, that's fantastic because she's going to go off on a new adventure, and I really wish that I could go off on an adventure too. So when you start to ask yourself, what's the worst that can happen? Suddenly, fear goes out the window. You have no fear, because when you kind of break it down to what is the very, very worst, you realize that you can cope with the worst, that you can deal with it, that actually it's not that bad. And when you get to that point, suddenly fear disappears.
Woohoo!
Woohoo!
All right, that's a 4.5. We've got at least 1 more opportunity in here.
Okay, I'm working up to it.
So, bringing this full circle, why is this movie so important now?
I think there is a lot of fear in the world right at this moment. And one of the things that intuition does is that it dissipates fear. If you believe you are guided, then by definition, if you believe in mystical intuition, if you believe in this notion of guidance and having a blueprint, having a destiny path, then suddenly there's nothing to be scared about. So suddenly, so let's. I know this show is apolitical, but let's look at Trump now, irrespective of your politics. He's got to be a good thing, either because he's getting rid of structures. There has to be a rebirth. There has to be, the storm. The fire, the conflagration that goes through the forest. So that new shoots can sprout up and so forth. Now, I'm not going to get into the politics of all of that, but in other words, you can look at things that you think are a bad thing or a good thing or whatever.
Well, you hit the nail on the head earlier. If everything is happening, in hindsight, you can see, like Carolyn Mace is saying, that what you think and is labeled as bad may not be that at all. Then in the moment, things can seem terrible, but there still may be a plan taking place. There may be some order, like you were talking about God, universe, source, whatever we want to call it, moving these pieces around that much greater than our understanding of what's currently going on.
Exactly. And we think that we understand, but really we don't. We don't. I one of the things that astonishes me is that no one ever predicted the internet. You look at all of the futurists, you look at H.G. Wells, you look at all of the science fiction writers and so forth. Nobody ever predicted the internet. So what else is around the corner? This notion getting back to your question as to why this film is important at the moment, what I have tried to do with this film is demystify intuition and make intuition accessible for people so that they can realize that it is a functioning system, and if you follow certain steps, you can tap into that system. I call it going to the intuitive gym and developing your intuitive muscle. It's the same kind of thing. We all have intuition. It is born with us, just like we have a heart, and just like we have, various organs. We have intuition. It's born to us. But a lot of times we shut it down. It atrophies because of lack of use. And what we have to do is we have to start to use it, acknowledge it, realize that it exists, that it's there for us to use to benefit us, so that we can make better choices in our life.
Woohoo!
Hold on a second. I'm going to go for 5. Okay, just get ready. Woohoo!
Oh, you got it, man. You got it.
Oh, really?
So
sweet.
I'm going to go from there. We've really got to wind things up, but I've got to ask a few more questions. First off, the F word. I can't believe I'm saying that. Follow. So, yeah, we didn't discuss follow, and that is so important. We hear it, we acknowledge it, we may trust it, but then we have to
follow it.
Yeah.
And follow is a really big one, because on an intellectual level, we can acknowledge intuition exists. We can get ourselves to a point of awareness, and you used the term presence before.
Yeah.
Where we allow it into, and we can do all of these things. We can trust it, but trust and following are two separate things. We've got to have the courage, to follow through. Now, for instance, your whole thing about Aspen, you got to this point where you've got this level of awareness where you know intuitively this is the right thing to do, and you're looking at the cost and all of this sort of thing. But you've got to have the courage then to follow through with your intuition, and that's a big one.
Yep.
Because there's a huge number of reasons why a lot of people won't follow their intuition. And once again, Carolyn Mace in the film talks about regret. She says,
"Oh yeah."
She says, regret are God's post notes. You didn't listen to me? Bing! She said, that's a regret. That's a God post note. And so true. So many times we live with regret. And this comes back to disappointment. We have disappointments, So yeah, following your intuition, which is the last step, there's no point otherwise. Because if we don't follow through, then everything we've done up to that point is a waste of time.
Yeah. And those things that we do, I don't think we ever regret having tried something and not succeeded. It's the things that pulled at our heartstrings and we didn't try that tear us apart.
Yeah, but even when things don't work out in the short term, I do believe that things that you are led down that path for a particular reason, even though at that point in your life you can't figure out why, and you think that has been a waste of time. You curse intuition because you feel as though it's led you wrong, and so forth. But intuition never leads you wrong. As one of the people in the film says, there is no downside to intuition. There's only an upside.
Woohoo!
I've got my 5. I'm not going to do any more.
All right. So, few last things we've got. First off, Where are you going, or where are you being guided, and what are you doing next?
Michael, I would next like to make a film on fear.
Wow.
I would like to make a film on the spiritual aspects of fear, because I think the world really needs it. And looking at fear from all different aspects, from cultural, personal, fear of loneliness, fear of death, fear of ugliness, fear of not being taken seriously, all of these various fears. I'd like to apply the same kind of rigor that I applied to intuition and apply that to fear. I think there's a really interesting film to be made there. And from a personal point of view, I think that I would learn a lot. One of the wonderful privileges that I've had in the making of this film on intuition is I've got to travel around the world. I've got to meet these amazing people. Some of them have become friends, but I've got to learn and grow. you know. And I'm sure that's one of the reasons why you do what you do as
Oh,
well.
heck yeah.
You know, because you're in a similar kind of privileged position where you get to meet and talk, you know, really quite intimately and in depth with all of these amazing people, you know, and crikey, what's life without each day hoping that we're going to grow a little more?
Not living.
Yeah, yeah. And, you know, so many people aren't living. You know, they have shut themselves down and they are what Lee Carroll calls in survival mode. You know, they're survival living. But you can still provide. You can still meet all of your obligations as a parent, as a family person, you know, as a citizen, and still live a divine, intuitive life.
Woohoo! Getting self-conscious. I had a former coaching client tell me recently that he ranks the shows by the number of woohoos that come out. And I told him, I said, oh God, you know, I actually try to keep them down. I try to tone them down. And he goes, that's what's so great. Because when it's a 3 show, I know that's an average show. When it's a 5 or 6 show, and I know you've been trying to hold it down, those are the shows I share.
Well, we've got later on. I'm going to have to go back and count them. I'll put a sheep counter to them. You know, like these little like the things that you count the sheep going through the gate. Yeah, I'll do that.
We're doing well. So I want to take off my coaching hat. I want to put it on you for the moment here. Because I want people to take action based on what they're listening to today. What one homework assignment would you give people today to start cultivating or following their own intuition?
Well, number one, I think that it's terribly important that people acknowledge that intuition exists, because a lot of people don't. But putting that aside, I think if there's a homework exercise, it's to each day pay attention. Now, I regard pay attention both internally and externally. Externally, pay attention to the signs, the synchronicities, like you said before, the journal, you know, the coincidences, the moments when things come to you that you think are weird.
Yeah.
Pay attention to those. But internally, pay attention to your thoughts, your feelings from moment to moment, how you feel about somebody. You know, when you meet somebody in the street, are you judging them? You know, all of these things. If you start to pay attention, then I think that that's a terribly important first step to opening yourself up to intuition. And that's a big task, to pay attention both externally and internally.
It's so important. What, Jessica, she always wants me to ask a question for parents and their kids. What advice would you give parents to help cultivate intuition in their kids?
I think it's really important to keep children in their imaginative state and to keep them curious. I think that this is the most important thing, really, in developing them, not only as intuitive beings as they grow older, but in having a creative life. Now, that creative life need not be going into the arts or anything like that, but a creative life, whether it's creative in how they paint the house or how they do the garden or how they, you know, deal with somebody. But I think encouraging imagination and keeping that childlike quality is really important.
Woo!
Come on, woohoo! Oh, yay!
I couldn't resist. Because it is so important. And when I ask that question, I'm going, this is such a loaded question, because the kids have the intuition. It's our job not to muck them up and unplug them from that and tell them you can't have that, to get serious, to pay attention only to the linear thoughts. So I'm so glad you went there.
Well, you know, that's really interesting you say that about children and intuition, because it's absolutely true. But here's what I believe. You see, I'm a parent of 3 children, and I remember shortly after birth, or just moments after birth, holding this child in my hands and looking into the child's eyes and seeing this extraordinary wisdom, this age-old wisdom in the eyes of this newborn. And it's only now that I realize that, in fact, what I'm looking at is I'm looking at that soul. I'm looking at the ageless wisdom of that soul before the veils come down.
Yeah.
And that's happened in the 3 children that I've had. Each time I've been shocked. Michael, I've been shocked to see this wisdom staring back at me. And it's old.
I'm resisting.
Come on.
All right. Couple last things I've got here. First off, three last things. First, what brings you the greatest happiness, or what I call the woohoo factor?
All right. Well, this is going to be a weird one. Cricket. Now, Americans
don't understand it.
No. But we have, here in Australia, our old foes are England, of course. England colonized Australia, and we're all convicts, and they're the policemen and the officers and so forth. We play them in cricket once every 2 years for a little tiny urn called the Ashes, and we have just whooped England 3-0. Now, in cricket, in the Ashes, right? You've got there are 5 matches in the Ashes. Each match is 5 days. Each day is like 8 hours. So we've got in one game we've got 5 days of 8 hours. Now I'm glued to the set the entire time. I'm glued to the TV set the entire time. So we've just whooped them 3-0, and now we're hoping that it'll be a whitewash and 5-0, and that is what is my woohoo!
All right, I have. On that note, where can people go to find out more? And also, I have to mention this, to find out about your opening on, if I get this right, the 10th in San Rafael.
Yeah, what we're doing is we're having pop-up screenings of the film, what I call pop-up screenings. They're called theatrical on-demand screenings. So what that means is that if somebody wants to see the film and they're prepared to host it, then they go on to, probably the easiest thing is to go onto the film's website, go through to the distributor, and they register themselves as a host, and then they bring people to it. We're doing, my wife and I, throughout January, are doing a series of Q&As throughout America at these pop-up screenings. So if you go onto the distributor is Gather, GATHR.US, Gather, GATHR.US. Go onto the PGS tile, you'll see the screenings and come along. In April, we are releasing the film online through probably through Apple iTunes and Google Play and stuff like that. So if you can't make a theatrical screening, you can get it online. The Q&As are really interesting. We always get a lot of really fascinating questions. So if you can make it along, that'd be great. And
best URL for people to go to?
www.pgsthemovie.com.
Fantastic. And if you didn't catch, www.pgsthemovie.com, is that correct?
PGSthemovie.com, yeah.
If you didn't catch that, come on over to InspireNationShow.com and we'll get you over to PGSthemovie.com as well. So before I let you go, and this has been tremendous, this has been so much fun, and I feel we could just keep going on and on and on, but we do get to let people go. Any last words of wisdom, and maybe one more woohoo coming, that you want to share with people?
Life is just so bloody great when you're intuitive, Michael.
Woohoo!
It really is as simple as that. What I realize is that life becomes so simple when you start to accept guidance. Suddenly, everything just drops away. It becomes so simple. And, hostilities drop away, old grudges drop away, financial security or otherwise drops away. All of these worries and disappointments no longer matter. I mean, if you truly believe in guidance, as I do now, and I live by it every day, then what can go wrong?
Amen. And that's a mighty, it's all you, Bill.
Woohoo!
Thank you so much, Bill. This has been a tremendous amount of fun. I think a record number of woohoos as well. So for everyone out there, this is Michael Sandler saying, be well, have fun, watch PGS, and make intuition your personal guidance system today. And shine bright.
Thank you, Michael. It's been a huge amount of fun. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bill. This was tremendous. Your movie is tremendous. The Secret was its own incredible movie, its own way. Love it or not love it, it has really changed people's lives. Your movie is perhaps even more important because this is our guidance system. One thing about thoughts become things is thoughts. We're talking about here the intuitive guidance, going beyond the thought.
Michael, one thing which I hope is that the film gets to a point where the term PGS becomes an acronym for intuition. In other words, I followed my PGS today and everything worked out okay. If that happens, then I will have done my job right.
And that again
Woo-hoo!
is a woohoo!
Thank you, Michael.
Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like below. Also, leave your comments. Have some real fun with it. Subscribe to our channel where you're going to get more great videos, more interviews coming up. And check out our website, inspirenationshow.com. That's where you'll find tips, blogs, information, videos you won't find anywhere else, and useful and helpful resources to really help you kickstart your life and to shine bright. Thanks so much again. Thank you for your support. Like, comment, subscribe. See the website. Thanks so much and have fun. Of course, shine bright. Woohoo!